Maybe you won't believe me right now. In this day and age, people are used to looking for logic in everything. In physics, in chemistry, in the behavior of madmen. But I have seen things that laugh in the face of your logic. Everything I am about to tell you is the absolute truth, no matter how wild it may seem. My name is Maxim. Until recently, I was just an ordinary guy looking for a job through an online ad. But I didn't end up in an office or a warehouse. I got a job at the company. It doesn't have a flashy name, only an acronym on our badges that we are forbidden to speak out loud. Our task is the containment of anomalies and paranormals. At first, I didn't believe in it myself. I thought it was some kind of strange quest or a psychological experiment for the ultra-rich. That was until I went to my first site. It was an old, abandoned cannery on the outskirts of the region. There we busted a group of people, ordinary-looking men and women on the surface, members of some kind of cult. They lured people in with job offers, and then they fed them to something living in the basement. I saw it with my own eyes. A skinless arm, 3 meters long, reached out a waste vat and dragged a screaming poor soul into the darkness. That was the moment I realized the world is much scarier than the newspapers say. Today's mission was different. My partner, Victor, who has been in this business for about 10 years and hardly ever speaks, and I were called in on an emergency basis. We were issued gear that looked more like props from a sci-fi movie and sent, as management put it, to the border. "Where are we going, Vitya?" I asked as our armored van turned off the highway onto a dusty dirt road. "Into the corn," he muttered, checking the bolt on his strange carbine that fired tranquilizer capsules for large targets. A signal came in, a spontaneous rift in reality. Civilians have already been pulled in from our world. Our goal is reconnaissance, and, if possible, closing the windows. We arrived at a massive cornfield. It seemed infinite. The stalks were unnaturally tall, at least 3 meters high. The golden ears rustled in the wind, but the sound wasn't pleasant. It reminded me of the whispering of 1,000 people trying to warn you of danger, but unable to pronounce a single word. The sun was at its zenith, but a strange haze hung over the field itself. The air shimmered like it does over hot asphalt, though there was no heat. Quite the opposite. A grave-like chill wafted from the field. Listen carefully, rookie. Victor stopped at the very edge of the field. This isn't just grass. This is a boundary zone. A step to the right, a step to the left, and you're in another dimension. Stay behind me. If you see something that doesn't look human, shoot. If you see something that does look human but acts strange, shoot twice. I swallowed the lump in my throat, gripping the handle of my rifle tighter. My palms were sweating inside my tactical gloves. We stepped inside. With the very first step, the sounds of the outside world vanished. The roar of the van's engine, the chirping of birds, the sound of the wind in distant trees. Everything was cut off, as if someone had pressed a mute button. All that remained was the rustle of corn leaves against our clothing. We had been walking for about 5 minutes, but the field didn't end. On the contrary, the corn was getting thicker. I looked back and went cold. The road we had come from was gone. Only endless rows of golden stalks closing in behind our backs. "Vitya, we lost the exit," I whispered. "There is no exit anymore, Max," he replied calmly, not looking back. "Now, there's only forward." At that moment, the ground beneath our feet changed. Instead of soft earth, I felt something hard like old cracked concrete. The corn began to thin out, and we emerged into an open space. But it wasn't a highway or a forest clearing. We were standing on the edge of something that had once been a city. But the sky over this city wasn't blue. It was a dirty gray, with heavy, motionless clouds that seemed to press down on the roofs of the houses. "Welcome to the Upside Down," Victor said, pulling out an anomaly detector that immediately broke into a furious beep. Look for signs of the civilians. They're here somewhere, and pray that they're still in one piece. I looked ahead. A couple of 100 meters away from us, between leaning houses, stood an old car. The doors were flung wide open, and scattered things lay on the ground. A picnic basket, someone's cap, and a broken thermos. The owners were nowhere to be seen. We moved forward deeper into this dead world, unaware that hundreds of eyes were already watching us from the void of the abandoned building's windows. That my name is Artem. If you had told me this morning that my life would end up like a discarded scrap of paper in a windstorm, I would have laughed. We were just 4 friends looking for a break. Me, my girlfriend Maria, and my 2 best friends from college, Anton and Boris. We had packed the trunk of my old sedan with charcoal, marinated meat, and enough soda to last a week. The plan was simple: find a quiet spot by the river, light a fire, and forget that the world existed for a few hours. But the world had other plans for us. We were driving down a narrow, forgotten stretch of highway when the landscape began to shift. The lush green trees of the countryside were slowly replaced by an ocean of yellow. Corn. Thousands of acres of it, standing tall and silent under a sun that suddenly felt too bright, too artificial. "Look at the size of those stalks," Boris remarked, leaning out the window. "That's some serious fertilizer." "Hey, Artem, pull over for a second. Let's grab a few ears for the grill. Fresh corn beets, store-bought any day." I laughed and slowed the car down. "We're trespassing, man. Some farmer's gonna come out with a shotgun. In this heat." "No way," Anton chimed in, already unbuckling his seatbelt. 5 minutes. In and out. I'll even leave a $5 bill on the fence if it makes you feel better." I pulled over onto the gravel shoulder. The silence that hit us when I killed the engine was absolute. No verts, no crickets, just the low, rhythmic rustle of the leaves. Anton and Boris hopped out, joking and shoving each other like kids. They climbed over the low wire fence and disappeared into the golden wall of stalks. "Don't get lost," Maria called out from the passenger seat, though she was smiling. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The air inside the car started to feel heavy, like the atmosphere before a massive thunderstorm. I tapped my fingers on the steering wheel, my eyes fixed on the spot where they had vanished. "They're taking their sweet time," I muttered. "Artem, go check on them," Maria said, her smile fading. Her voice had a sharp edge of anxiety that I didn't like. "They're probably just messing around, but it's been too long." I sighed and opened the door. The moment my feet hit the gravel, a wave of cold air washed over me. It shouldn't have been cold. It was the middle of July. "Anton, bullies!" I shouted, cupping my hand around my mouth. "Quit playing around. We're losing the light." No answer. Only the shhhshhhhh of the corn. I walked to the fence, my heart starting to thud against my ribs. I looked into the rows. The corn was so thick you couldn't see more than 3 feet ahead. It was like looking into a yellow fog. "Maria, I'm going in," I said, looking back at her. "No, wait. I'm coming with you," she replied, quickly stepping out of the car. "I'm not staying here alone. Something feels wrong." We climbed the fence together. As soon as we stepped past the first row of stalks, the world behind us seemed to dim. I looked back, expecting to see my car in the gray asphalt of the highway, but the corn had already closed in. It felt as if the field had swallowed the road the moment we turned our backs. "Anton, bullies!" Maria called out, her voice trembling. We started to walk, following what looked like trampled paths in the dirt. But the deeper we went, the taller the corn became. It was no longer 3 meters high. It felt like it was reaching for the sky, blotting out the sun until only a sickly, filtered gray light reached the ground. "Artem, look," Maria whispered, pointing to the ground. Lying in the dirt was Anton's phone. The screen was cracked, but it was still on. There was a text message open on the screen, addressed to no one. It just said, "Help. It's not corn. I picked it up, my hands shaking. Suddenly, the rustling around us changed. It wasn't the wind anymore. It was the sound of multiple things moving through the stalks, fast, low to the ground, and coming from every direction. "Run," I whispered. "What?" Maria looked at me, her eyes wide with terror. "Run," I screamed, grabbing her hand. We bolted. We didn't care about the rows or the path anymore. We tore through the sharp leaves, the stalks cutting into our skin like serrated knives. I counted our steps: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We had only gone 5 steps into the field originally. We should have been back at the road, but there was no road. We burst out of the corn, gasping for air, expecting to hit the gravel. Instead, our sneakers slammed on a cracked, ancient concrete. We weren't on the highway. We were standing in the middle of a street in a city that looked like it had been rotting for 100 years. The buildings were gray and skeletal, their windows like empty eye sockets. The sky above was a bruised, heavy purple, and the air smelled of wet stone and old blood. "Artem, where are we?" Maria sobbed, clutching my arm. "I don't know." I breathed, looking around the desolate square. Then I saw them. Near a rusted fountain in the center of the square stood 2 figures. "Anton, boys!" I yelled, a wave of relief washing over me. They were standing there, staring at a third man, a tall, weathered stranger wearing a tattered coat and carrying a heavy iron pipe. He looked like he hadn't slept in years. We ran toward them. "What happened? Where's the car? What is this place?" I bombarded them with questions, but Anton and Boris just looked at me with hollow, haunted eyes. The stranger stepped forward, his face a mask of grim exhaustion. "Keep your voice down, kid," the man said, his voice a low growl. "Sound travels differently here, and the things that live in the fog, they have very sharp ears." "Who are you? How do we get home?" I demanded. The man looked up at the heavy purple clouds and sighed. "My name is Miller, and you need to stop thinking about home. This is the other side. There are rules here. There are patterns. If you follow them, you might live through the night. If you don't," he pointed to a dark stain on the concrete near the fountain. "Welcome to the city," Miller said. "Try not to die. It makes the cleanup much harder for the rest of us." The moment we stepped out of that suffocating sea of yellow, the world shifted its axis. 1 second, the sharp scent of corn pollen was burning my nostrils. The next, I was inhaling the stagnant, metallic stench of a dying metropolis. It was as if a giant hand had plucked us from the earth and dropped us into a grayscale nightmare. "Artem, Maria," the voices of Anton and Boris pulled me back from the brink of a panic attack. They were standing near a fountain that was choked with black, oily moss. Beside them was the man Miller, looking at us like we were just more fuel for a fire that was slowly going out. "Anton, what is this? Where's the highway?" I yelled, running toward them. I looked back, expecting to see the corn, but there was only a shimmering haze where the field should have been. We had walked 5 steps in, but we had come out miles, or perhaps worlds away. "It's gone, Artem," Anton said, his voice trembling. "Everything is gone. Quiet," Miller snapped, slamming the end of his iron pipe against the concrete. The sound echoed through the empty streets, and I felt a dozen cold shivers run down my spine. "I told you, sound is a death sentence here. You hear that?" I froze. At first, there was nothing but the heavy silence of the gray city. Then I heard it, a rustle, not from corn, but from the shadows of the surrounding buildings. It wasn't 1 or 2 things. It sounded like 6, maybe more, moving in a coordinated, predatory circle around the square. "Scritch, scritch, talp. What are they?" Maria whispered, her hand tightening on my arm until it hurt. "The neighbors," Miller whispered back, his eyes darting toward the dark windows of a skeletal apartment block. They don't like newcomers, but they're afraid of the light. Follow me, and don't stray from the center of the road. If you lose sight of my heels, you're already dead." He led us down a street where the asphalt was buckled and torn, as if something massive had been burrowing underneath it. The buildings leaned inward, blocking out what little light filtered through the bruised purple clouds. I saw silhouettes in the windows, tall, elongated shapes with too many joints, watching us with unblinking interest. "You said there are others here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "A few," Miller said without looking back. "The lost. Some came through the field, some through the fog, some just woke up here. This city is a trap, a celestial drain where the universe throws its trash. And right now, you're the newest pieces of garbage." We turned a corner and saw a small light, a flickering orange glow coming from the basement of a reinforced concrete structure that looked like an old bank. A heavy steel door stood ajar, guarded by another man with a crossbow. "Rules are simple," Miller said, turning to face us as we reached the threshold. "This city has a rhythm. It breathes. Every few hours, the geography shifts. The road you came in on might lead to a cliff tomorrow. But the biggest rule is the sky." He pointed up. The purple clouds were starting to swirl, darkening into a deep, necrotic black. "The rain is coming," Miller warned. "And in this world, water doesn't bring life. It brings dissolution." We stepped into the basement, the heavy door groaning shut behind us. Inside, a dozen people sat around a small fire, their faces hollowed by hunger and a bone-deep weariness. It was a community of ghosts. "Is there really no way out?" Boris asked, his voice cracking. "There has to be a door. A rift. Something." Miller sat down by the fire and began sharpening his pipe with a whetstone. The screeching of metal on stone was the only sound in the room. "There is a legend," Miller said, his eyes reflecting the orange flames. "A story about a man named Maxim. They say he came here with a silver key and a map of the cracks. But he went into the deep zone a year ago and never came back. Unless you find his ghost or his gear, you're just waiting for the city to decide how it wants to eat you." I looked at Maria, then at my friends. We weren't survivalists. We were just people who wanted a picnic. But looking at the hopeless faces in that basement, I felt a spark of something else. "We're not staying here," I said, my voice louder than I intended. "We're going to find this Maxim. We're going to find a way back." Miller looked up, a grim, toothless smile tugging at his lips. "That's what the last group said. I saw their boots hanging from a telephone wire 3 days later. But hey, feel free to try. The city always appreciates a fresh challenge." Outside, the first drops of the black rain began to fall, sizzling against the concrete like acid. The nightmare was only just beginning. The night in the basement was a symphony of horrors. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the sizzle of the acid rain against the heavy steel door, a sound like 1,000 snakes whispering just inches from my ear. Miller sat by the fire the entire time, his eyes wide and unblinking, as if sleep were a luxury he had long ago traded for survival. "The rain is the great eraser," Miller muttered, not looking at us. "It dissolves the memory of what the street looked like yesterday. When the sun, if you can call that pale eye in the sky a sun, rises, the world will be different. Don't trust your eyes. Trust your feet." I looked at Maria, who was curled up against my side, her breathing shallow and jagged. Anton and Boris sat across from us, staring into the dying embers. We weren't just friends anymore. We were a pack of frightened animals huddling together before the slaughter. Miller said the biggest one is like a 4-story house. Boris whispered, his voice trembling. "How do you fight something like that with a pipe and a crossbow?" "You don't fight it," a woman from the shadows of the room replied. She was holding a bundle of rags that might have been a child once. "You just hope you aren't the loudest thing in its path." When the morning finally arrived, the black rain had stopped, leaving the air smelling of burnt plastic and sulfur. Miller opened the heavy door, and I stepped out first, my hand gripping a heavy iron bar I'd found in the corner. The square was gone. The cornfield that had been at our backs when we arrived had vanished into thin air. In its place was a long, straight road that stretched toward a horizon obscured by a thick, yellow fog. The buildings had shifted too. They were taller now, more jagged like teeth growing out of disease gum. It changed. Maria gasped, her eyes wide. The field. How can it just disappear? The city is alive, girl, Miller said, leaning against the doorframe. It's a puzzle box that keeps rearranging itself to keep the mice confused. That road out there? It wasn't there yesterday. It might be gone by noon. He offered us some dried, gray strips of meat that tasted like salt and despair. I looked at the faces of the people in the basement. People who had given up, who were content to rot in a hole until the city finally claimed them. We can't stay here, I said, looking at Anton and Boris. If we stay, we become like them. Miller said there's a way out, something about a guy named Maxim and a map. We have to find it. There is no exit, Miller barked, though there was a flicker of pity in his eyes. I've seen 100 heroes walk down that road. None of them walked back. Then we'll be the first, I said, my voice hardening. We gathered what little we had, a few bottles of stale water and the iron bars. I took Maria's hand, her palm cold and sweaty against mine. We said our silent goodbyes to the ghosts in the basement and stepped out onto the new road. Wait, Miller called out. He tossed me a small, rusted compass. The needle didn't point north. It spun lazily, occasionally snapping toward the yellow fog. If the needle starts spinning fast, it means the geography is about to shift. If it stops completely, start running. It means something big is right behind you. We started walking. The silence of the city was deafening. Every footstep on the cracked asphalt sounded like a gunshot. The houses on either side of the road were silent, but I felt the weight of 1,000 gazes from the dark windows. Artem, look, Anton whispered, pointing to a telephone pole. Hanging from the wires were 3 pairs of shoes, tied together by their laces. They were fresh. One pair looked exactly like the sneakers Boris had been wearing before he lost them in the corn. The city is mocking us, Boris breathed, his face turning pale. We kept moving. The road seemed to go on forever, but after an hour, the scenery began to change again. The gray buildings were replaced by rusted industrial warehouses. The yellow fog grew thicker, swirling around our ankles like a living thing. Suddenly, the compass in my pocket began to hum. I pulled it out. The needle was vibrating so hard it looked like a blur. Miller said to run if it spins. I whispered, my heart skipping a beat. It's not spinning, Maria noted, her voice rising in panic. It's pointing. The needle snapped toward a massive, dark silhouette emerging from the fog ahead of us. It was a house, a 3-story Victorian mansion that looked completely out of place among the warehouses. But as we got closer, I realized it wasn't a house. The windows were eyes. The porch was a gaping, toothless maw, and it was breathing. Back! Go back! I yelled, shoving my friends toward a narrow alleyway. We scrambled into the darkness just as the massive entity shifted, its wooden skin creaking like a ship in a storm. We huddled behind a dumpster, our hearts racing. We're going to find that exit, I whispered, as much to myself as to them. We just have to survive the night. But as I looked at the end of the alley, I realized the road we had been walking on was gone. In its place was a wall of solid, unyielding brick. The maze had closed, and we were trapped inside. The alleyway didn't just feel tight. It felt like the walls were slowly inhaling, pressing their cold brick skin against our shoulders. We stood paralyzed, staring at the dead end where the road had been moments ago. The house creature was still groaning somewhere in the fog behind us. A sound of grinding timber and wet, rhythmic thumping. "We have to move," I whispered, pulling Maria toward a rusted fire escape. "If we stay in this bottleneck, we're cornered." We climbed. Every metal rung shrieked under our weight, a beacon for whatever was hunting us. We reached a flat roof covered in a layer of black, oily soot. From up here, the city looked even worse. A chaotic jumble of architectures from different eras, stitched together by a madman. Suddenly, a sound tore through the air. It wasn't the groan of the city. It was a high-pitched, vibrating howl that felt like a drill in my ears. "Look!" Anton pointed to the street below. Emerging from the yellow fog was a figure. It was entirely white, its skin the color of a drowned corpse. It ran on two legs, but its movements were jerky, like a puppet with tangled strings. As it got closer, I saw the horror. It had no lower jaw. Its tongue hung down like a limp, bloody rag over its chest, and where its eyes should have been, there were only deep, charcoal black pits. It stopped, tilted its head, and then it let out that howl again. From the fog, 3 more howls answered. "They've caught our scent," I breathed. "Run! To the next building." We sprinted across the rooftops. The jawless stalkers were fast, disturbingly fast. They didn't climb. They leaped, their long, pale limbs clinging to the brickwork like insects. "There! A house!" Maria shouted, pointing to a small, 2-story structure that looked relatively intact. We leaped across a 4-foot gap between buildings. I caught Maria, pulling her onto the gravel roof. Anton made it next. But Boris was a second too late. As he prepared to jump, a second type of creature, something much larger and more grotesque, burst from a skylight behind him. This one had no arms, just a massive, barrel-like torso and a head that was nothing but a vertical mouth. It slammed into Boris with the force of a car crash, knocking him 3 meters back into the center of the roof. "Boris!" Anton screamed, turning back. The armless beast lunged again, but I didn't think. I swung my iron bar with every ounce of terror-fueled strength I had, catching the jawless stalker that had just climbed onto our roof right in its face. Its skull cracked like an egg, and it tumbled back into the abyss. "Anton, get him! Now!" I roared. Anton grabbed the semi-conscious Boris by his jacket and dragged him toward the gap. Maria and I reached out, pulling both of them across just as the armless creature let out a frustrated hiss. "Into the house! Go, go, go!" We scrambled through a window into the 2nd floor of the building. I slammed the frame shut and shoved a heavy wooden dresser against it. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely stand. "Is he okay?" "Boris." Maria's voice was high and panicked. Anton was kneeling over Boris. Our friend was a mess. His shoulder was mangled, and his breathing was a wet, bubbly sound. "He's dying, Artem. He's dying right here." "No, he's not," I lied, my voice cracking. "We just need to..." A scream cut me off. Not Boris's scream. A scream from the floor below. I froze. I had been holding Maria's hand just a second ago. I looked down. My hand was empty. In the chaos of the scramble, she had fallen through a hole in the rotted floorboards into the darkness of the 1st floor. Maria. I didn't wait for Anton. I jumped down the hole, landing hard on a pile of trash. The room was dark, lit only by the faint purple glow of the sky outside. I saw her. She was on the floor, her eyes wide with a terror so profound it didn't even look human. Standing over her was a 3rd stalker. It wasn't eating her, not yet. It was just watching. Its long, pale fingers were tracing the outline of her throat. "Get away from her!" I screamed, lunging forward with my fists. I didn't even use the bar. I hit the thing with everything I had. I felt its cold, rubbery skin bruise under my knuckles. I hit it again and again, a blind, white-hot rage taking over my mind. I was a man possessed, striking the monster until my hands were covered in its black, oily blood. I must have been hitting it for 10 minutes. I didn't stop until Anton's hand grabbed my shoulder, pulling me back. "Artem, stop! Stop!" "She's gone." I looked down. The monster was a pulp of white flesh beneath me. But Maria, she wasn't moving. The creature had been faster than I thought. Her throat had been opened before I even landed. I fell to my knees, a hollow, echoing silence filling my head. My girlfriend was dead. Boris was dying upstairs. We had come to this world for a picnic, and now I was standing in a pool of blood that wasn't mine. "We have to go," Anton whispered, his voice dead. "We can't stay here. The rain is starting again." I looked at Maria's face one last time. She looked peaceful, like she was finally back in the car, sleeping on the way to the river. "I'm going to kill every last one of them," I whispered to the dark. Every last one. The silence in the house was heavier than the darkness. Maria was gone. Upstairs, the wet, ragged gasps of Boris had finally stopped, replaced by a chilling, absolute stillness. Anton sat at the top of the rotted stairs, his head in his hands, shaking with silent, rhythmic sobs. I stood in the center of the room, my knuckles raw and dripping with the monster's black ichor, feeling a cold, hollow vacuum where my heart used to be. "Artem, we can't just stay here." Anton's voice drifted down, hollow and brittle. "The rain, look at the windows." Outside, the black acid rain had begun to fall again, sizzling against the glass and eating away at the window frames. We were trapped in a coffin of wood and brick. "I know," I said, my voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. Someone older. Someone harder. "Wait here." I couldn't look at Maria again. I couldn't. I needed to move, or I would shatter. In the corner of the kitchen, I noticed a heavy wooden hatch. A cellar. I grabbed a half-burnt candle from a shelf, lit it with a trembling hand, and descended into the belly of the house. The basement was cramped and smelled of ancient dust and copper. My candlelight flickered over the walls, revealing something that made my blood run cold. 2 more bodies, or what was left of them, lay slumped against the far wall. They wore tactical gear, much like the company Maxim had mentioned. They weren't just civilians, they were professionals, and they had failed. Between the corpses sat a small, leather-bound book. A diary. I picked it up. The name on the inside cover was written in bold, frantic strokes. Maxim. I flipped to the final pages, my eyes scanning the hurried handwriting. Day 412. The city is shifting faster. It knows I found a rift. The exit isn't a door, it's a frequency. 100 meters north of the twisted house, near the industrial sector. You have to cross the threshold while the rain is falling. The acid acts as a solvent between the 2 layers of reality. If you find this, take the weapon. It's the only thing that hurts them. May God have mercy on whoever comes next. Lying beside the bodies was a heavy, matte black assault rifle. An AK style, but modified with silver-etched symbols along the barrel. I checked the magazine. Full. A surge of cold, calculated purpose washed over me. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a hunter. I climbed back up, the rifle slung over my shoulder and the diary tucked into my belt. I woke Anton and told him to get ready. I didn't tell him about the bodies. I just told him we were going home. But the rain. Anton gestured to the door. Miller said it would dissolve us. Maxim's diary says it's the only way the door stays open. I replied, checking the sights on the rifle. We run. We don't stop, no matter what you hear. We burst out of the house into the stinging, black downpour. The acid bit into our skin, burning like 1,000 hornet stings, but I ignored the pain. I saw them immediately. The 2 monsters from earlier, the jawless stalker and the armless titan that had crushed Boris, were waiting in the middle of the street, their pale skin shimmering under the black rain. They hissed, tensing their muscles to lunge. "For Boris," I growled. I raised the rifle and pulled the trigger. The weapon didn't roar like a normal gun. It let out a sharp, metallic crack that echoed through the city like a thunderclap. The silver-tipped rounds tore through the jawless stalker, erupting in flashes of white light that turned the creature to ash before it even hit the ground. I swung the barrel toward the armless beast and emptied the rest of the magazine into its center mass. It let out a gurgling shriek and collapsed into a heap of dissolving meat. "The rift! There!" Anton shouted, pointing ahead. 100 meters away, the air was shimmering, distorting the gray buildings like a heat haze. Beyond the shimmer, I could see it, the golden stalks of the cornfield, the familiar gray asphalt of the highway, and my old sedan parked on the shoulder. "Go! Anton, jump!" We sprinted through the searing rain, our clothes smoking as the acid began to eat through the fabric. We dived headfirst into the shimmer. The world flipped. The stench of sulfur was replaced by the sweet, heavy scent of wet earth. I hit the ground hard, rolling onto the gravel of the highway. I gasped, drawing in a lungful of cool, fresh air. It was raining here, too, but it was our rain. Clear, life-giving water that washed the black soot and blood from my face. Anton lay next to me, staring up at the gray clouds with an expression of pure, shattered disbelief. We were back. We were safe. But as I looked at the cornfield, standing tall and silent behind the wire fence, I realized something. My hands were still shaking, not from fear, but from the weight of the rifle I was still clutching, the weapon that shouldn't exist in this world. I reached into my pocket and felt the diary. Maxim's words were the only proof that Maria and Boris hadn't just vanished into thin air. The city was still out there, shifting and hungry, just 5 steps away. And as I looked at the dark rows of corn, I knew one thing for certain. I would never go for a picnic again.